Maybe you should have Mac or not have Mac products, Jake. Maybe you should.
Yeah, well, I have Mac products, so let's get the party on the road because I'm at 36% battery.
Plug it in.
Well, I can't because I have headphones plugged in.
Oh,
God, your iPhone is so cool. I wish I could have an iPhone.
It's the worst.
I want one so bad right now. I can't plug two things in at the same time and do two things.
A podcast about bourbon and the ones who drink it. This is Bourbon Matters. Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Jake.
Did you just seriously fix your hair off camera by going this and then leaning back?
I scratched my head because it was itchy.
You sure? I'm Dan.
Introduce yourself, Dan.
I said I'm Dan.
Welcome to Bourbon Matters. I'm Gold Eagle Jake. Thank you for listening.
Thanks for sticking through the first 20 seconds of this episode.
You seriously just fixed your hair off camera right before you started.
I scratched my head. It was itchy.
Okay.
So tonight we're talking about...
We gotta look good. Gotta look good for our listeners.
It's gonna need more than flicking his hair off screen like that.
So tonight we're talking about acquisitions, particularly acquisitions of distilleries. There's been a lot of acquisitions in recent years. We've covered a few of them on the show, but we thought they kind of warranted its own episode to kind of talk about some of these, and I guess we can jump in by asking, why are distilleries being acquired? What's you phrased it better than me, Jake.
All right, I'll take over. So
yeah, thank you very much.
Why are all these acquisitionings happen? Why would you want to purchase a brand? There's obviously lots of different reasons, and I kind of wanted to just throw it back to you guys and see what first comes to mind when you would think of why someone would want to purchase a brand. Yeah,
so I think what we saw a lot of that really has died down this last year. We saw it a few years ago really take off. There's a lot of medium to large craft distillers that were getting bought out by big names. Yeah. Not necessarily bought out, but Heaven Hill coming in and buying out the rights to the label. Basically, the distillery stays open. They still produce their own stuff. Nothing really changes, but they're owned by a bigger company. And a lot of that is to help increase the sales. And on top of that is there's some things that you can do when you're a little bit smaller compared to these big giants that are out there, that you can do some more unique things. So it gives them, if Heaven Hill or Buffalo Trace or Brown-Forman buy out a big distillery or a medium-sized distillery operation, they now have more ways to make revenue off of somebody else that's doing different things than them. And instead of them changing to do what these craft distilleries are, they can just have them do it and make some proceeds off of it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. My point was just going to be a lot of the work is done in a lot of these cases. You have an established brand; they're already selling pretty well. You come in as a larger brand or a larger conglomerate, you can pump a little bit of money in there and boost their sales even more. It's kind of a pretty simple way to, like Dan said, grow your sales, expand your portfolio. And you get those freedoms that Dan was kind of talking about. As a smaller distiller, you get to experiment a little more and do that kind of stuff where, a larger distillery may not have as much of that freedom, because they're, maybe they're publicly owned and they can't waste money, on experiments the way that a smaller distillery, or not waste money, but invest in experimental, approaches to things the way a smaller distillery may be more willing to, in order to penetrate the market further,
On top of that, you're watering down your competition too, because now if
absolutely.
Instead of if they're now, if someone's buying craft and you own that craft, you're now making money off that sale versus the craft distillery taking that out of your pocket.
And you don't have to split your whiskey into more labels.
Right.
You just acquire more labels.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think that's the most common reason, and I don't want to say the most obvious, but a lot of times when we see these acquisitions, it's just to get more cash flow. It's to get more labels out there without having to do the groundwork up of completely designing a bottle and label and building the brand, getting awareness to it. But there's also other reasons too why you would acquire a brand or a distillery. You might acquire a distillery just to get their materials or facilities. You might acquire a distillery just to get access to certain things. With big conglomerates buying up other big distilleries, there's not really any additional access that you're getting. But, a lot of times these mergers happen to be able to kind of partner with their distribution networks, get into other states, and expand their own brand just by using the footprint that brand that they're buying already has. And I guess a couple of interesting examples. I'm not 100% sure that this is fully accurate, but I remember when Campari bought Wilderness Trail, one of the rumors was that they were buying it so that they could make wild turkey honey at Wilderness Trail and leave wild turkey to just totally focus on straight whiskey, straight bourbon, and just produce all the honey at Wilderness Trail, which is a huge seller for them, but a flavored whiskey. So that was a rumor. There was also a rumor that the reason Sazerac acquired Paul John was so that they could make Fireball at the Paul John distillery, which I think that is actually true, because they have the facilities to really scale and ramp up, and it's so hot there that you don't need old whiskey to make Fireball anyway. But that just ramps it up even more, even quicker. To be able to,
I think they use pretty high-end whiskey for Fireball because it tastes so delicious.
Yeah, it's probably 1 year old, maybe 6 month old. But now that if they're making it in India, they can probably get away with 3 month old and not have to worry about winter because it just is aging rapidly year round. So, just some other reasons. I don't know if you have any other thoughts, comments.
Well, I think, and we'll talk about it too, it doesn't really necessarily fall in one of the examples we're going to talk tonight, but one thing I think we're going to start seeing is I think we're going to start seeing distilleries going up for sale for dirt cheap. I think they're going to start off trying to make a profit, but I think with a lot of the whiskey glut that we're going to be having, some other things we've talked about, I think you're going to see some distilleries that spent way too much money on buying a lot of sourced whiskey that they're not selling through as much as they like. I think a lot of them are going to be sitting on it. I think a lot of people might have overstretched themselves on increasing production and spent a lot of money on bigger equipment that might not be getting full use anymore. So I think you're going to see some of that coming down the road as well.
Yeah, some flash sales, just realizing, oh shit, we spent all our money and now we don't have whiskey even that we can sell. So,
right, that or we have whiskey that's not selling.
Yeah, so that's definitely going to be a reason I think that we're going to see more commonly going forward. Now that there's just so many distilleries out there and everybody's producing so much more.
That was going to be my other potential reason, is just to buy the inventory that somebody has. Whether
especially if you're using it to make wild turkey honey or some kind of flavored something where it really doesn't matter, as long as it's somewhat decent quality, you can make a flavored whiskey out of it.
Yeah, and that's one of not my favorite acquisitions, but one of the most interesting to me was Penelope being acquired by MGP. because MGP basically just bought back all of the stock that they had sold to Penelope and the brand.
Yeah, we'll kind of get into that a little more when we go into certain acquisitions, because I do think that one is very interesting to talk about. Yeah, I think there's a lot of layers to that, like more than what you would think just by saying, "Oh, MGP acquired Penelope." They just now have another label of MGP bourbon that's owned by themselves. But
Before we start getting into big examples, should we talk about the reason that we're even talking about this today and what kind of made us think that this would be a good discussion
sure.
now with some recent things?
Yeah.
So I had sent an article to the Jakes just last week that I saw over the weekend where it was from the Rob Report, and it was saying that now's your chance if you want to own a Kentucky distillery. There's an availability. There's a distillery with a well-known name that's up for sale. It's a sealed bid, so you don't know what anyone else is bidding on the auction. And that's kind of what it was. And it's like, hey, if you want to start a distillery in Kentucky, there's going to be an option for you. So without too much having to dig, the reason that it was being sold is when you do a little bit of digging is you find out that the owners are getting a divorce. And they're selling off all their assets, and that's one of their assets that they're selling is a distillery. So when you put some of that knowledge together with digging in and finding out where the location is, the distillery that is up for auction and ends December 10th, I believe, is Old Carter, which is not. They don't distill their own stuff. It's all sourced, but they're sitting on a lot of very old barrels.
Yeah, this was very interesting. Caught a lot of people by surprise. Didn't catch me by surprise. I've got a kind of a quick, cool story about that. I was in Kentucky over the summer, and funny, we went to Old Carter during the day, which you have to be a member to go there, and I'm not a member, but one of the guys I was with is a member, and they have such a long waiting list to become a member. And I think you pay like $1,000 to join, and then you have to purchase every release that they do, and their bottles are not cheap.
No.
So you're committing to buying a lot of bourbon by being a member, but you do get to go do a tasting at their facility anytime you want to. I think there's like a limit on how many you can do per month, but it is right in the heart of downtown Louisville. It's very small, but it's very nice. They have nice big leather couches, so they take you up there. They pour 4 to 6 whiskeys for you, and what I love about it is it's just like a conversation. You're just there hanging out with the Carters and drinking some really good whiskey. And so somebody else was hosting us, but Sherry Carter walked in that day. We saw her, talked to her, went and did some other things, then went out to dinner that night, ran into Mark Carter out at the restaurant that we were in. And I probably should watch what I say because I don't want to get myself or the podcast in trouble. But he had a few cocktails and kind of hinted that this was all going to go down. And then one of the guys in our group on the way out was like, "Oh my God, they're getting a divorce. This is like huge. What's going to happen to the brand?" And then 3 months later, you see the distillery go up for sale. So
Yeah.
For sale, and the reason is because of legal issues. So
yeah, we're not going to go into any. I don't think. Yeah, I'm not going to at least go into any more details or anything else about that. But this is a very well established brand. Sought after, very niche. Doesn't get distributed everywhere. All the bottles are between $200 and $250 retail, and they don't sit around very long at all. I think you can only get it in Kentucky, California, Georgia, and there's probably a few other states, but we don't get it here in Illinois. So yeah, and not only are they a well-established brand with good, just all around, people love the brand, love the whiskey. A lot of it sells for a lot more on secondary sites. But they have probably one of the most insane inventories of barrels. I mean, most of their whiskeys are 15-year plus. They've got, they're very well. They I don't know how long they own a Napa winery, right, Dan?
Yeah, they own an apple winery that's also for sale.
Yeah, so they've been in the game for a while. They have really, really good connections. They also were going to the one guy that we met with at Old Carter who worked for them, which by the way, they only have 4 employees, Mark and Sherry Carter, and then 2 other guys. And one of those 2 guys was starting a side project where you would essentially create your own label, pick barrels from their inventory, and you'd bottle it under your own label. Nobody would know. It's essentially Old Carter. And that kind of fell through with all of this falling through. But he was telling me he has over 600 barrels of 15 to 20 year Wild Turkey, Heaven Hill, big name Kentucky distillery, you name it, and they probably have it.
Yeah, it's nuts.
So I could see this. I mean, someone with a lot of money is going to have to buy this, but I could see one of the big distilleries like Willet, who does bottle sourced older, extra aged products, coming in and buying this distillery just to acquire those barrels. With no interest in taking over the brand, but just here's a couple $100 million. We're going to take all your barrels and we're going to make a lot more from that.
Yeah, I mean, there's real estate and stuff in there too. I think if it's a distillery that's buying it, like a Willet or one of the big distilleries, if they're buying it just for stocks, I could see them not caring about the name, selling off the property, and just buying it straight for the barrels. But at that point, you're not going to overbid. You're going to pay for what the barrels are worth, what the property's worth, because you're not going to make money off the other stuff. You're just wanting some of that older whiskey.
Which I don't even think they have. And like their facilities are tiny.
Yeah. It's 2 buildings because it's that and it's the house or the building that Justin's House of Bourbon's in.
And it's a really nice building on the inside. It's pretty old.
Corner lot.
Yeah, but it actually would be like a perfect remote bar or speakeasy for Willet.
Yeah.
Or one of the Bardstown distilleries to come in and say, hey, we're going to do what Bardstown Bourbon Company did, and like how they opened a bar in downtown Louisville. That would be a perfect spot for one of them to come and open a little kitchen / cocktail bar.
That's what I was
Bardstown or Lexington, get into Louisville and get some more money. I think that's more probable than someone that's got a lot of money that wants to start their own whiskey brand, because they're going to be overpaying for a lot of things if they're doing that. It'll be interesting. Like, we're not going to have, since it's a sealed bid auction, we're not going to know what the total was unless it gets leaked somehow. But I'm more interested to see how much it goes for, because a couple of years ago, people were way overpaying or paying way more than what a brand was worth at the time to bring on like a Wilderness Trail or some of the ones we'll talk about. Where now I don't know if they're going to be paying much over what book value for it would be. That's just my opinion, my thoughts, but it's just the way the whiskey industry is kind of going. I don't see people getting $1.10, $1.15 on the dollar. I think it's going to be more like 90 cents to $1 or what everything's worth. And
I think it would depend on if you want the label or not.
That's the thing, is it's either going to be a big distillery and they're not going to care, they're wanting the stocks, or it's going to be someone that wants to start their own distillery and they're not going to want to have someone else's name on their label.
Well, like, for example, if I'm trying to pick somebody that Dan won't make fun of me for picking, if Jim Beam decided that they wanted to buy the Old Carter brand and leave it as Old Carter, they might pay quite a bit more than somebody who's just trying to buy it for the stocks. And
They could. I think the brand's pretty
I
much
was I
dead
was gonna
though.
say they could. I don't see it happening. I could also see. Well, no, I couldn't see this happening either. But like Buffalo Trace could because they bought the Pappy name. They bought
Yeah.
Eagle Rare, Taylor, all their brands they purchased and then recreated. But yeah, this is very niche. It's very specific. You need somebody to really work hands-on in a smaller scale with these barrels that they have if you want to continue this brand. So I do think it's going to be a big distillery that is buying it just for the barrels,
Or blending
maybe,
house.
or blending house,
Yeah.
maybe doing some kind of satellite location if it's the right distillery, or it's going to be some private equity firm or somebody who just has a boatload of money from selling a different company or working in the corporate world who just wants to get out of that and do something a little more fun.
You know who probably makes the most sense for it?
Who?
Bardstown.
No, they already opened up a location and
No, but I'm saying sell the location. They could use the barrels for their Discovery series.
they could.
Oh,
Yeah, they could.
Yeah. I don't know. I still think Willet. I still think that would be a perfect like speakeasy bar. They did a pop up speakeasy at the music festivals in Kentucky this year, and
Yeah.
they with the purple tops. Those are all sourced mostly from Heaven Hill, but they right
And they're
now people.
already extremely overpriced. So
That's
it's a
what I was gonna
perfect
say.
fit.
Like people are paying. It's now $400 MSRP just for a 10 or 11 year bottle of bourbon. So in some of their hyper aged 15 to 20 year stuff, they sell for $600 to $800 a bottle retail. So they could probably get away with paying a lot for all these barrels and then selling them off pretty quickly because you just can't get
God, I
enough.
would think that they got to start to be threatened a little bit because people aren't spending as much on the super high end.
No,
I don't
but
know.
people fucking love Willet.
It doesn't sit around anywhere.
Yeah.
And we still don't get much. We still, I mean, we get probably 5-10 bottles a year,
And
and we have a awesome
I'm
relationship with
blanking
them.
on the guy's name that comes to all the master classes. He's like a huge Willet guy. Sorry if you're watching.
Nyron,
I'm blanking. What is it?
Nyron,
Yeah, I think that's him.
he just put together like a mini sampler set of some different purple tops and sent them out to people.
Oh yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because me and him were talking a while ago, and he was like, "Yeah, I get like almost every purple top I can get my hands on. Like some of them suck, but that's okay." And like Jesus, like I can't imagine spending that much money and being like, "Wow, this sucks." Like
Yeah.
this is a $250 bust.
Well, yeah, and that's the thing is they're very hit or miss because they are all single barrels and they're sourced from different places, even though it's mostly Heaven Hill. So they're very very hit or miss. I mean, they're good, like they're very good, but are they $250 to $400 good?
Yeah, for the value.
I mean, but even with Bardstown, if they don't put it in Discovery, they can resell it as source whiskey.
Yeah.
That's part of their contract program
Any
too.
any
So
any of those big distilleries have the following, and if they were like, oh, we got a 15-year 130 proof Kentucky single barrel, only 100 bottles available, they can charge whatever they want.
Yeah, I do think it is interesting though that you brought up the Buffalo Trace idea because
All their brands that they have right now are purchased.
every single brand is basically a buyout of some existing distillery that made their money as like a family owned distillery, like Stitzelweller, the Van Winkles. Who else am
Well, every
I? Oh,
brand,
those are the big
Taylor.
ones. I mean, yeah, they're all named after various, but like the Stitzelweller and the Van Winkles are like the big ones, and like an Old Carter type brand would fit really well in their portfolio, I think.
It would. The only problem would be that Old Carter is blended, and
Yeah,
Buffalo Trace has done a great job of buying these brands and distilling it themselves.
Yeah.
And you can tell the difference between a Pappy from 30 years ago that you can now, but they've done a pretty damn good job of getting the quality almost to where it was by distilling it themselves. And we all know that's very, very hard to do just with different water source, different still, different climate, different elevation that you're aging. So all these things play into factor. But yeah, they could buy the old Carter brand and use it for. They probably have a ton of different experimental stuff they could put in that bottle. But
Yeah.
The one thing they don't really have is anything sourced, though. Then that'd be the
yeah,
one thing
No,
that
right.
wouldn't fall in line for
That's
them
the
at
most
all.
off-brand aspect
Yeah.
of it. Yeah.
But also all the brands that they purchased started sourced and then transitioned into their own distillery.
Right.
So they would kind of need to do the same thing here, or they would
Yeah.
do the same thing here. But before we get into more and different acquisitions, because I've got a big list in front of me, I'm sure you guys can think of a big or a lot of different acquisitions too. But off the top of your head, what happens typically when a big acquisition happens?
Looking for initial reaction.
Initial reaction, thoughts, like, obviously it can go completely one way, completely another way. But what's like some big things that'll happen when a brand is purchased? And if you want,
mean,
I can throw a couple things out there.
Yeah, for me, particularly when I hear that an actual distillery is acquired by a like conglomerate like a Campari or a Diageo or whatever, my like first thought is that their quality is probably gonna take a hit. Whether that's correct or not, that's kind of my first instinct. I
So
can't
that
really
quality
point
was
to an
one of the
example,
things
but
on my list.
yeah,
But I said quality either improves or decreases.
yeah, and
Like usually you'll see one or the other.
I think it somewhat correlates to the size of the distillery being bought. If they're small, it's easier to ramp them up in quality. If they're already like big and well established, it's harder to drive better quality. I feel like it's easier to like cut corners, cut costs, spit out, you know, cheaper, faster whiskey. That's where you'll take a quality hit. But
Yeah, I'll give a quick example on that. Wild Turkey, I think, taking over Wilderness Trail, we like the single barrel that we have, I think is better than the single barrel weeded that we picked before, but it's also older. They kind of just let stuff sit and age. But I think we may see a quality decrease in Wilderness Trail. Maybe it might just be temporary. Hopefully not. But that's because the people who are all behind the brand and working with it, aka Macaulay, who now started Dark Arts, like he didn't want anything to do with Wilderness Trail when they came in and bought them out. They were probably telling him what to do and how to do it. And he's like, no, I built this brand from the start and this is how we've been doing it. Why would I want to change the way we're doing it and do it the way you want me to? So people like him who are really touching the brand every single day, working behind the scenes to make it as best as they can, step away from the brand, that's when you see a lot of questions about quality.
right,
I mean, we weren't big dollars, but we were a pretty decent sized company, and when we would buy out similar companies to us, it's basically what you're doing is they have either, like for us, it was marketing territories. For these guys, they have barrels. That's your assets, right? They have assets. A lot of the ones that have been taken over, they have a decent amount aging already and getting close or at age of release, where they can just pour their money into it to increase sales. and then you look at the company and you're going to go everything you can to the bottom line. So what they're going to do is they're going to say, hey, we're now going to do things this way. This is the way you've been distilling things. Not anymore. We're gonna switch to this style of distillation because we can produce more alcohol at a lower cost. And that's what's going to happen a lot of times. But it's a lot what these companies were getting bought out the last 4 or 5 years for hundreds of millions of dollars. That's exactly what was going on. They saw them as a company that had a name, that was doing well, that had enough stock that they could just throw some money at, get some marketing, increase their sales really quick. And then as soon as the sales start to get increased, all right, now we got to fix the bottom line.
Right.
Because when you're smaller, you're always concerned about the bottom line. But you're also uber concerned because it's your brand, right? This is your company. This is everything you've put yourself into. So you care so much about it. And now your affiliation with that is almost tossed off to the side. And that's why you see a lot of these distillers that were involved in these distilleries that got bought out switching after not too long of a time. Because it's no longer their passion. It's someone else's passion, and their passion is the bottom line.
Yeah.
Which there's not, I mean, it's business. You have to do that.
Yeah.
I mean,
but
it's like, I don't remember who said earlier, but the other extreme of that is the conglomerate buys a small brand because they can experiment and they can kind of just write off any failures, because it's low volume. It's not going to, impact their bottom line to any massive degree. I think a good example of that, though not a perfect example, but a close one, is Heaven Hill's acquisition of the Samson and Surrey.
That's literally what I was going to say. And use that double buyout with Few as an example, because and going back to your point really quick, Dan, you're not answering to yourself anymore. You're answering to shareholders, stockholders, a board, people who want to see one thing in particular, and that's money, cash flow, profit. I think Samson and Surrey purchasing Few, because Few was making decent whiskey. It wasn't great, but it was good, and local people liked it because it was local. It had a cool story behind it. Samson and Surrey comes in, changes a few things, says, here, we're going to give you, a master blender who's going to come in and kind of innovate and help push things forward a little bit more. And then Few comes in and Heaven Hill comes in and says, all right, we're buying Samson and Surrey. Now, Few, we want you to stop making gin. We want you to start making the whiskey this way. And boom, within a couple of years, I mean, we talked about it all the time, the quality of Few has gone up a lot.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, an example of quality increases.
And they're also doing some really cool, like, experimental one-off kind of releases that Heaven Hill wouldn't really want to invest in.
They're starting to do more finishing barrels. Starting to blend with. They've always kind of done this, but they're doing more, blending with tea. Blending or just different unique experimentation stuff that they're doing.
Lots of like cool flavor combinations that like really you can only get away with that if you're doing it at the level of like a couple barrels, and like Heaven Hill's not going to waste time doing that. But if they have a small brand like Few that can run those experiments, and like if they strike like absolute gold, then you can push that up the chain to your big time distillery and learn those lessons and apply it to a wide scale product. That's the advantage, I think, of having those small craft distilleries in your portfolio. But it's it's probably comes down to how the larger company runs. I think Heaven Hill has a little bit of leeway because they're privately owned. Some of the others, like now I'm trying to think of which
Moët
conglomerates
Hennessy,
are
Pernod
public.
Ricard,
like those are all publicly
Campari,
traded.
Bacardi,
Like, you don't have as much
Constellation,
of that
the
freedom.
Diageo, the big guys who are constantly buying up brands. And what happens when they buy up brands? The price increases on those brands. That's, I think, the most common thing that we see, because they buy brands that have momentum and that are doing well, and they try to keep that momentum going by pumping money into ads and raising the prices on the bottle, because they think people are paying for it anyway and they want to get their profit up.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting acquisitions that we actually talked about at one point, was Wild Turkey being bought by Campari, right?
Yeah.
Wild Turkey is massive, one of the big six, being bought out by, a multinational conglomerate. But like, we haven't, or maybe this is a question, I haven't really noticed much difference in Wild Turkey's offerings after that buyout.
But also that was a unique acquisition, because part of that agreement was the Russells get to keep doing their thing, and they're not. Part of that agreement was they're not going to change anything. They're not going to tell them what to do. That was purely, hey, we're going to back you with all the money you want, and you're going to keep doing your thing, and we're just going to take some profit off of what you're making.
Yeah. So I guess that's,
So there's good and bad. There's definitely good and bad. I don't know. I'm hopeful for Wilderness Trail, because I do think Campari has the right intentions when they take over companies like this. Unlike, some of the bigger guys like Constellation and Diageo, I think, that are just purely in it for making more money and profit. So speaking of some other companies, why don't we dive into some different examples?
Yeah.
Of acquisitions
do you want me to read Google AI, or you want read Google AI?
Well, how about instead of reading Google AI, you just pick some of your favorite ones from it that you think are worthy of a discussion. I have probably 2 or 3 that I think are definitely worthy of a little discussion.
Yeah, I mean, we already talked about the Heaven Hill acquisition of Few. Also in that portfolio was Widow Jane, which also has seen the same quality increase, I think, that we saw in Few. Dan, you didn't go to the masterclass.
I think,
believe me,
I was at a big spirits tasting at Benny's last year, and they were there with a bunch of different unique expressions that were behind their pouring thing, and I was still not impressed.
I like that they've expanded their line. They now have the Baby Jane. They're coming out with more quantity on their limited offerings, like the Vaults and the 13-year and the Decadence. But I also think that this is an example of Heaven Hill letting these brands just kind of continue, for the most part, doing their thing.
Right.
And just offering the guidance when they need it, offering the resources when they need it. The Samson and Surrey is a very impressive portfolio. We mentioned Widow Jane and Few, but Tequila Ocho is one of the most highly rated tequila brands. Mezcal Vago is one of the most highly rated mezcal brands. They have Bren, which is a French single malt that's really good. It really doesn't get a lot of exposure here, but it does very well around the world. So that Samson and Surrey portfolio, they also have Blue Coat Gin. So it's a very good portfolio of brands. I think it was a phenomenal acquisition by Heaven Hill. And these are brands that are self-sufficient. They're doing well, and they're probably just, like I said, have the guidance and the resources now that Heaven Hill has at their exposure.
Yeah, that's a good example of a company coming in, acquiring, and letting them kind of exist. The same thing with how we just talked about Wild Turkey.
Yeah.
Similar situation. Then, the other one that I already kind of touched on is Penelope. Penelope's funny because they were, I believe, exclusively sourcing from MGP.
Yes.
Basically just buying, selling, and churning barrels over and over again and making more and more money, buying more and more barrels. And then at some point, somebody at MGP was like, hey, why don't we just buy these guys?
Here's a couple $100 million. You guys keep doing what you're thing, but we're going to give you even better barrels now.
Right. And it's like, we talked about that because Penelope was one of a couple brands that MGP, I think, acquired in the past couple of years.
Well, so they acquired Luxco.
Yes, that's right.
Which is the huge one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we also really haven't seen them do a whole lot with Luxco. They kind of just let Luxco do their thing. They gave them money to build that beautiful distillery in Bardstown. Mm-hmm. But they're still releasing all Kentucky juice, and it's still all about 5 years old. We did see Old Ezra 7-year rye come out that was distilled in Indiana, and that's a pretty solid rye. But other than that, most of the Luxco stuff has remained the same. But I do want to go back to the Penelope really quick, just because I do think that is another really good acquisition, mostly just because MGP has really, really struggled at creating brands and marketing their own brands. The Remus is a great product. Rossville is a great product. Those are two brands that MGP started, and they've really, really struggled to get those brands selling.
Yeah.
Which is like and you can easily tell because if you ask our listeners, I'm sure some would know, but if you ask most people at a bourbon store and ask them what Ross and Squibb is, they have no idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But like Remus Repeal, I think, is maybe a little overpriced, but it's a great bourbon. Mm-hmm. And it's got some impressive age statements on it. And most of those releases just sit on the shelf for a while. Even just the regular straight Remus, which is like $45 on the shelf. I mean, it's like 6-year MGP. That's a great product, but people pay more for 4 and 5-year MGP under other labels. Mm-hmm. And the Rossville rye is a phenomenal rye, and nobody knows what that brand is. So MGP is really bad at marketing and building brands, but they know how to make really good whiskey. So buying Penelope was a perfect acquisition for them. Mm-hmm. They can pump some older stuff into those bottles. They can give them more quantity, and they can just keep rolling with the momentum that Penelope had already created.
Yeah, and let them do the cool stuff like the Rio and rosé finish and
and
all
make
these
more
other like cool stuff. Yeah, finishes, and I'm sure MGP has access to all those casks and stuff too. So it is a really good partnership.
All right, so how about a bad one? Constellation purchases High West. In 2016. Constellation is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, liquor brands, owners, companies, whatever you want to call them. And that was, I think, a perfect example of a distillery going downhill on a big acquisition. Because all they did was raise the prices and the quality went down. We saw Midwinter's Night Dram go from a really, really good $70 bottle to a very average...
mediocre, yeah.
And that's a compliment. $180 bottle.
It is a stop sourcing from MGP.
And it's still going to sell out everywhere. We're supposed to get 8 cases either next week or the week after, and they probably raised the price again. I think last year it was like $170. It's probably raised again, and the quality is probably still terrible, and it's going to sell out.
Yeah.
So bad example. Another really, really bad example, which I almost completely forgot about this, was Stoli buying Kentucky Owl.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We've all heard that story before. Dixon Dedman, the creator of Kentucky Owl, Stoli comes in and buys them, and literally just starts raising the prices for no reason, which is the main reason why Dixon Dedman left Kentucky Owl, because he was just like, "Why are you guys raising the prices? This is a $200 bourbon, and you're trying to sell it for $1,000." And then they're also messing with his blends and changing the proof and proofing them down after he finished blending them just so they can get more bottles out of it. Like, that is not a healthy partnership.
No.
And that brand just completely went downhill after that acquisition. They killed the Kentucky Owl brand.
Yeah, I don't know anyone that like seeks out Kentucky Owl anymore.
The last time I had it was your wedding.
Yeah. And that was actually a Deadman bottle.
Yeah, so those were all great, but yeah, everything now, like, you have to be very hesitant, and yeah, I don't like the hype and the buzz is completely gone from Kentucky Owl.
I still have two. I have a bourbon and a rye that are still Deadman.
Nice.
I'm saving those because
save them until he comes and does a master class, and then get them signed.
Oh yeah,
then you got a real gem.
Yeah.
The jury's still out on this one because their own stuff hasn't come to market yet. But when Pernod Ricard bought out Jefferson a couple of years ago, because Jefferson had been primarily sourced, they bought him out, which gave them enough money to create their own stills so they could make the whiskey they want. But they haven't released their own whiskey yet. It's still source stuff. So that'll be an interesting one to watch.
Yeah.
Because I would be going from source to hand distilled.
Yeah, Pernod Ricard is a huge player. I mean, I think one of their first acquisitions in American whiskey was they purchased Smooth Ambler back in 2014. And I think that was not good. I think the Smooth Ambler brand kind of went downhill from there. But they also have a pretty good track record with other brands. Pernod Ricard purchased majority stake in Rabbit Hole, like 1 year after Rabbit Hole got started up.
Rabbit Hole also did the skyrocketing price thing.
They did, yeah.
For no reason.
Yeah, I mean, literally, it was just, all right, we lost money on some of these other brands. Rabbit Hole's doing really good right now. It's really hot. Let's jack up these prices. And Rabbit Hole's good.
Releases.
I like Smooth Ambler. I like Smooth Ambler better than like Rabbit Hole.
Smooth Ambler's good. It's a brand built on MGP, but when they changed the bottle shape, and it also got a lot younger, which doesn't really make a lot of sense because you would think a brand or a company like Pernod Ricard would come in and say, all right, we got money now. We're going to start buying older barrels. But they went from having 8 and 9 year, 10 year MGP single barrel bourbons down to like 5 and 6 year now. So unless they're just sitting and letting stuff age, I think, the price stayed the same and the whiskey got a lot younger.
Is it the Founders
series, yeah.
Are phenomenal, though. Those are good.
From where?
From Smooth Ambler.
Oh.
Yeah, the rye is one of my favorite ryes of all time.
Also, I think people loved their bottle when it was tall and skinny, and they switched to those shorter squat bottles.
Yeah,
And then ever since then, there's been just no buzz around Smooth Ambler.
What other examples we guys got?
Bacardi purchased Angel's Envy in 2015.
Yeah, we bitched about Angel's Envy in the last episode, right?
There's always room to bitch about Angel's Envy, but Angel's Envy. Bacardi before 2015, we used to create, and this was before I was involved at Gold Eagle, but we used to create our own blends of Angel's Envy. It was kind of like a Maker's Mark experience where they gave you different proportions to mess with on creating your own bottle of Angel's Envy with different finishes. And as soon as Bacardi came in and bought them, that was the end of that. No more Angel's Envy barrel picks, no more creating your own blend. It's just, hey, we're going to mass produce the regular bourbon and that's it. It's going to be a grocery store brand. People are going to love it because it's low proof and it's finished in port. And that's pretty much it with that.
The rye is decent, though.
The rye is decent, but maybe a little overpriced.
Yeah.
But it's good.
If you're a listener of the episode and taking over a distillery is something that interests you, do I have a proposition for you guys? Because just down the road, about 20 minutes from Whiskey Acres in the town of Rochelle, is a distillery you've probably never heard of called Kenne Farms. They built a big distillery in Rochelle not too long ago, with the one making their own whiskey and then two going to be doing some built a big enough distillery to do some contract distilling, which never really panned out, is now up for sale. So if you want to buy a distillery and be in direct competition with Whiskey Acres, that's something you can do. It's $12.5 million. You get all of the equipment, all the setup, use of the building. You don't get the building for the $12.5 million. And it's like, I couldn't remember, it was like around 3,500 barrels. For $12.5 million. So they're all 1 to 4 years old.
Wow.
That's a lot.
Have you tasted any of the stuff, Dan?
They just released their first bourbon the day after the distillery went up for sale. I have not been out there. They've had a little bit of rye out. I've never tried their rye. It's 2-year-old rye. I have not tried their 4-year-old bourbon. So I know nothing about it. I can't say anything plus or minus. I didn't see the local whiskey club going crazy for it, or a lot of posts on how good it was or anything like that on the opening night. So I don't know. But it's also big enough to do your own contract distilling. So,
yeah, I feel like Illinois is not the place to do contract distilling.
No, Illinois is a great place for business.
I mean, no one wants Illinois contract distilled bourbon. They want Kentucky contract distilled bourbon. So
but MGP's not Kentucky
on the label.
They want
Middle West isn't Kentucky.
Well, yeah, Middle West is creating great stuff, but people don't want distilled in Ohio. Yeah. Even though their Middle West is creating great stuff, they want Indiana or Kentucky.
Yeah. The only reason they want Indiana is because it's MGP. And that, like we've talked about several times, distilled in Indiana used to be like a slur. So
yeah, it still is to some people, which is just dumb. Good whiskey is good whiskey, regardless of where it came from, how old it is, any of that stuff.
Oh, yeah. Yep, absolutely. That's the one thing that bugs me the most is the age statement.
Yeah, I don't drink anything under 10 years.
Well, how old is it? Well, I only drink it if it's 8 years or older. Does it taste good or does it not?
Yeah,
I would be interested in purchasing that distillery if I had $12 million.
12.5.
Yeah.
And then you still got to pay rent to run that because you don't get the building. You get use of the building, but you still got to pay rent.
If I had the money and if I tasted barrels there and thought they were good, I would be interested. But still, that's a lot of money to recoup from a Illinois distillery.
If you did have that money to buy a distillery, chances are you're going to be leaving Illinois soon anyways.
Yeah, chances are I would just go move somewhere else and not work again in my life.
Yeah,
but that is interesting. Maybe we'll get some listeners buying the distillery. I don't know. Who knows who's listening to our podcast?
Yeah. Dan won't be able to work for you because he's got a non-compete.
I do actually.
Non-compete in DeKalb County?
It's a 100-mile radius, I believe. But it's also the state of Illinois. None of that matters anyways, so it's pretty hard to uphold in the state.
So a few others to mention, which we don't really have to get into too much. Moet Hennessy buys Woodinville in 2017. It's interesting just because Moet Hennessy is a huge global brand, and I'm pretty sure this was their first step into American whiskey. I could be wrong about that.
I think you're right.
But I think this was their first U.S. whiskey, which I don't know. This is another one where I think they stepped in, they raised the prices a little bit, and the quality is good but not great on Woodinville. Although I do really, really like that 8-year that they came out with. But the only problem is that was sourced. That was the first thing they released that was sourced.
Yeah, that's what my aunt and uncle live in Seattle,
Mm-hmm.
and they pop over there every once in a while. He said that 8-year was the best thing they ever put out.
Yeah, the 8-year was insane, but yeah, they didn't distill it. That was sourced. But I do know they have a huge following on the West Coast, the Northwest Coast, and they do a lot of different experimental stuff that's just released out there.
Yeah.
So yeah, if I lived out there, I would probably be a big Woodinville fan. I think. The other one to mention is Molson Coors acquires Blue Run. We've talked about it before, but worth mentioning because a beer company getting involved in a distillery. But yeah,
I think Blue Run seems like one of those brands that was destined
new
to be
and shiny
from the start.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
new and shiny with a lot of money behind it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and then it wore out quickly.
Yep. We'll see.
Their ryes are really good. I'll give them that.
You say that about everyone's fucking rye.
But
like every single rye. Oh God! You're turning into Roberto. Oh, it's so good. This rye is so good. Oh, you gotta try their rye. Have you tried their rye? That's you. That's you.
Oh my God.
I don't have it over here. The golden rye from Blue Run is
phenomenal. Best rye you'll ever have. I've never said that ever in my life.
It's excellent, but everything they make is extremely overpriced.
But the rye, so good.
Hey, the man likes rye. All right.
Yeah. I mean,
but you still got to be able to critique, because if everything is good, then that means that everything is either
what's a bad rye,
shit.
Jake? What's a bad rye?
Let me see.
While he's seeing, I gotta compliment the bottle that you're drinking, Dan.
The old 595.
The OG.
The old 595.
The OG Whiskey Acres pick.
Yeah, I'm drinking the new one.
Nice.
Yeah, I got 595 behind me.
I'm drinking some Nashville rye, actually.
Nice. Yeah, Jake can't find a bad rye.
Rye that sucks. Whiskey Acres rye sucks.
Yeah.
I was waiting for you to say that, but I know you can't actually say that with a straight face.
Shit. One of the Smoke Wagon ryes really sucked.
One rye really sucked. That's it.
It was the Bottled and Bond.
It wasn't the malted rye. I think it was the Bottled and Bond.
That one really
we
sucked.
thought wasn't as good.
Honestly, the Bardstown Origin is just mediocre. I wish it was a lot better.
Wait till you try this HLP Systems barrel proof Bardstown Origin rye single barrel.
I'm sure it'd be the best rye. It's so good.
Oh, it's really good.
And I think part of the problem is that they're not part of the problem. They're proofing it down. They're blending. They're trying to make a consistent product. As it gets older, it might get better, but
let's save the rest for our rye episode that we're gonna do in a couple of weeks.
We just did a rye 3 episode.
But we didn't. We that was with Karthik. That was talking about all about his brands. Doesn't matter.
All right.
I'm developing a theory on rye whiskey, and we're gonna dive into that theory on our rye episode.
Here's your theory: rye whiskey is dying. Oh, it's true. That's the end. Theory over.
My theory.
I think
is
you're
that people
completely
who don't
wrong
like
about
rye
that.
are just assholes like you.
I have no problem being an asshole. I think I've proved that many times on
And
this
the
show.
real theory is that if you think you don't like rye, you haven't had the right rye yet, because there are 4 different categories of rye whiskey, and you probably just had one of the 4 that you don't like. But we'll save it for the rye episode. I think this
we're gonna waterboard Dan with rye.
Yeah.
Oh, you can't do that now that Trump's back in office. I'm pretty sure that's illegal now.
I knew we wouldn't make it through the episode without Dan mentioning Trump.
I saw you getting ready to end it. I'm like, I gotta sneak it in.
Yeah,
I gotta piss someone off yet tonight.
But yeah, I think this was good. I think lots of interesting content here. We covered a ton as far as acquisitions and different examples go.
Speaking of interesting content, Jake, if people want some interesting contents inside of your store, where can they go to get that? That was horrible. I know I was reaching.
Yeah, I thought that was for sure going for Bourbon Matters, but yeah, if you want some interesting,
no, this isn't interesting.
If you want some interesting whiskey or whatever spirit floats your boat, you can come into Gold Eagle at 255 Peterson Road. You can also see our entire inventory and shop online at goldeaglewine.com. Download our app on the Google Play or Apple App Store to also shop our inventory. And make sure you check out our events. We got some really good events coming up for the rest of the year. Follow us on Instagram at Gold Eagle Wine. Follow us on Facebook at Gold Eagle Spirits. That is pretty much my plug for Gold Eagle. So, Jake, where can we find and listen to Bourbon Matters?
You can listen to us on Google, Apple, or Spotify. Watch us on Spotify and YouTube. Make sure you like, subscribe, rate, and all that stuff. Follow us on Instagram at Bourbon Matters and also Facebook. Make sure you check out Movie Matters. Then this month in November, we're doing all John Candy movies. So those have been fun so far. So go check out that other podcast. Again, that's called Movie Matters. And you can find us on all the same platforms.
What's it called?
Movie Matters.
Did you notice I didn't plug that when Karthik was around?
No, he didn't. Yeah.
No, I didn't plug it.
We took a week off, so we had to plug it, but it's all right. Yeah. We like it. Jake does some good podcasts and does a lot of behind the scenes work on our podcast. So
he does all the behind the scenes work.
He does all
the behind the scenes work. That's why he's awful in front of camera. All right. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.